This is CareShift with me, Saflik Bilikanti, and I am so excited about our guest today. Alice Zheng is a partner at Foreground Capital, the leading venture firm exclusively focused on women's health with over dozens of investments in the next generation of breakout companies in reproductive, maternal, and menopausal care, such as Seven Starling and Millie. Amazing to have you on, so thank you for being here today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I want to kind of go right into it. What are specific sectors in AI that every woman's health founder should be kind of working on right now that VCs are kind of completely missing?
Interesting. I would say that we are in a bit of a AI, call it hype or bubble or wave, because I do believe AI is radically transforming healthcare. Um, 6 months ago, I probably would have called it more of a bubble. And I think that we are in a valuation bubble with AI. I do truly believe in the past month, with some of the changes and announcements, I would say, by many of the foundational AI companies like Anthropic and OpenAI, as well as applied AI startups like Doctronics, we've really seen AI move from back office in care delivery into the front office and really serving patients directly, helping them, whether, on their own as consumers or related to physician and other provider services, directly accessing care through AI. The relevance with women's health is multiple fold. So in all the same ways that all other companies are leveraging AI tools to be more efficient and more productive, women's health companies are doing the same, and that's important to increase access to care and help these companies, scale faster. We see this within our portfolio across the spectrum, from diagnostic companies looking for new biomarkers through to care delivery companies that are automating much of their back office. In the pipeline that we haven't invested in yet, we are also seeing women's health companies, for example, leverage AI tools for new drug discovery. So that's not just about being, more efficient, doing things faster, but it's also doing things better that you couldn't actually do before. What I think is interesting as well about women's health and AI is that there's opportunity, as I just laid out, but also some watchouts. So we know that clinical research historically has had a male bias. What I mean is, number one, many of our foundational studies and our understanding of human biology is really rooted in male physiology. And also, when it comes to drug discovery, women weren't always included. And so what you have today is, many of the drugs that are taken off the market for adverse events often are because of adverse events in women. So as AI transforms our body of knowledge into convenient chat tools that patients are using, doctors are using, how do we ensure that this, the outputs are not biased and they actually serve women well? This latter idea isn't necessarily, a VC fundable idea, but I think it's something really important for the foundational companies to think about, the applied AI companies to think about, and just in general, as we move into this really transformative era in healthcare.
That makes a lot of sense. And in your case specifically, what have you been seeing, in front office and back office of healthcare? What have you been seeing the biggest shifts, in 2026? What has been the momentum going towards?
Well, I'm biased, but I will say that, women's health is definitely a big shift. I'm not sure if you were at JP Morgan a few weeks ago in San
It's not.
Francisco,
I
but
wish.
I went to, I can't even count how many events. I was tracking a list of 60 of them, and obviously can't go to all. But my takeaways from that week were, one, women's health was really taking over in many ways. The conversation is moving, beyond the dedicated players, which, for example, I consider our fund a dedicated player. We saw Flagship Pioneering put on an event, Microsoft put on an event, Aura getting into the conversation. And so, more of these mainstream players are caring, which is promising. And there were over 30 events focused on women's health. So that's one trend. The second trend is around, AI, again, moving into the clinical realm. AI that's prescribing medications, AI that is the first touch point for consumers managing their healthcare, to get answers, to then take that to their doctor. That is a foundational shift, for sure. And not all companies are doing that, and sometimes for good reasons. Enterprise partners are often quite wary of that, from privacy concerns to safety and accuracy of the information that's being given. And so the big shifts and the big, I would say, focus areas I saw were women's health and AI in the clinical realm. And I'm really actually interested as well in that intersection of what is happening at the intersection that you can innovate on, that you can incorporate into incumbents. What can we do with this transformative tools?
Oh, what are the different gaps that you're seeing in women's health right now that are kind of making a big jump in coming years?
So, women's health has a lot of gaps, which is why it's such a great white space opportunity. And over the years, we've seen different trends, rise and I wouldn't say fall, but just come emerge, I'll say. So, a lot of women's health innovations started with period trackers. This seems like table stakes, right? These days we track our sleep and our hormones and track so many things, but it took a long time for period trackers, which could have been incorporated into Apple products, for example, but they weren't. So separate products were created, and those have gotten much more sophisticated. That now many of them are including different types of biomarkers along with just some manual tracking of your period, and this can be used to predict ovulation windows for fertility, for contraception, and for other purposes. That was a rise. We saw other waves in maternal health, many companies that are addressing women's postpartum issues, prenatal issues, etc. And menopause was actually one of the latest waves. I would say that 3-4 years ago, there were probably a single digit number of companies that people would have heard of, but now there are dozens. And one of the fastest growing companies in women's health is actually in the menopause and midlife space. That's MIDI Health. So we're still riding those waves. And when I look ahead, where I see some really interesting areas emerge, just to name a few, one is around hormonal health. And this is beyond fertility and contraceptive use cases. This is about holistically understanding your set of hormones, which could be reproductive and otherwise, like cortisol, for example, and having a near continuous measure of that so that you can really correlate that with symptoms, with different conditions that you're experiencing. So I see hormonal health as a big theme and trend. We do have a company in this space that is enabling saliva-based hormone testing, which allows very easy at-home access. I would say the next wave is actually true continuous hormone monitoring, which is something that you might wear, on your skin or just right under your skin, that gives you that continuous tracking. So one is hormonal health. The second is longevity is, a big trend that is arising. And this has shifted in a way. Longevity a few years ago really meant trying to, live forever. So, live longer through all sorts of creative, means. And it was a very kind of male dominated conversation. I would say longevity today is looking more like preventative health, just earlier than guidelines. So it's not necessarily from your doctor. It's not from your lab. It's in more the consumer health space, but it's about living healthier longer and not just living longer for the sake of trying to live longer. And the third area I would say is, of course, all the ways that, we just discussed that AI is transforming, women's health companies. That's kind of three different trends, and many more as well.
Is it going to be like right when you were saying like hormonal tracking and all of this, it reminds me of like kind of going into Apple, kind of saying, okay, we want to acquire and kind of put this into our kind of application. Is that how the exits look like? What do the exit standpoint kind of look like here?
So as a growing area, women's health is still, I would say, paving its path in terms of the exit landscape, but there have been a number. And in fact, I can point you to a recent article, or a full report actually written by our portfolio company, AOA. It's called Follow the Exits. And I can send you the link as well for the show notes. So this actually tracked back at 25 years of women's health exits and $100 billion in exit value that's been created. And that's among disclosed exits. And there is much more as well that is undisclosed. And what's notable here is that many of these earlier exits were not labeled as women's health. They were diagnostic exits, or there was specific to the space they were in, but women's health as a term, as a space is a bit newer. So then the categorizations, weren't used then. Recently we've seen a slowdown in exits, not because of women's health, but because of the overall economy and markets. And so women's health is facing some of those, same types of challenges, but we're starting to see that shift as well. Even in the slowdown, we have seen several acquisitions. That's the other point to note, is that in women's health, we have had some IPOs, such as, Progeny. Otherwise, I think, strategic acquisition is more likely and more of what we've seen in recent years. And for that, I would point to a number of, active strategics. LabCorp acquired a company in our Fund 1 portfolio called Ovia Health. There are several device companies like Boston Scientific, Hologic, Cooper Surgical that are very actively acquiring. And so, as we invest in companies, we are also keeping an eye on the strategic landscape. And by strategic, I mean these large corporations with interest in the space.
Yeah. So now going back, I want to take a small leap into your journey, going back to your origin story. Like, what exact moment, took you out of going into practicing medicine and then going into VC instead? It feels like a complete, I don't know, like a 180 to me.
Happy to share my journey, which actually, I've spent time in a lot of different spaces. I would say these days there are a number of VCs that are actually clinically active, which did not exist when I was, clinically active. There's a few folks I can think of, at Andreessen, and also a guy called Morgan who is at Payor. His name of his fund, we can check. Who are these two individuals I'm thinking of are both active residents in clinical medicine, which means they have a full-time day job, but also active investors at funds. So I'm very impressed, and I didn't see that before. So for my path, I actually started out in global public health. I worked in East Africa and Asia for a few years before medical school. So I always imagine a split career where I would be part clinical and part-time doing something else. That something else has just shifted. Originally, I thought the other part would be something in public health. And as I looked at the type of impact that I want to have, I became more and more interested in the private sector, recognizing that that's what makes much of the world turn. So I did go to business school, and during business school, I spent the summer at McKinsey, and that was kind of like a residency for business, or a teaser, since it was just a summer. And that actually led me to not pursue a full-time clinical path. I saw a wider world, and I saw that I could have great impact at the intersection of medicine, business, and public health. Whereas at that time, it was really, you had to pick, the clinical path is a clinical path, and you don't really interact as much with the rest of the world and the other industries. And I knew that there was somebody else who could diagnose pneumonia better than I could, who could deliver a baby better than I could. But at that time, there weren't as many people at the intersection. So I ended up doing 1 year of residency to get the clinical experience, as I do think there's a big difference between being a medical student and being, an actual practicing doctor, even though intern is not the same as an attending. After that, I went to McKinsey for several years, and I served clients all across healthcare, including hospitals, device companies, pharma companies, even global health. And from there, I joined this VC fund, originally called RH Capital, now called Foreground Capital. And that was really driven by an interest to be closer to innovation. So with a company like McKinsey, we are serving Fortune 500 companies and really seeing how those big corporates, I call them now strategics, how they think and how they act. Unbeknownst to me at the time, and looking back, I now understand, 2021 was when I switched from consulting to VC. Turns out it's an extraordinary time. That's when funds were really blowing up. There was a lot of LP capital flowing into funds. Interest rates were low. There were these macro factors that led to a huge boom in VC activity. And now, almost 5 years later, I'm seeing that was actually not normal. It was extraordinary. And we are in a bit of a reversal now in VC.
Yeah. So you brought up a lot of great points there, and I kind of wanted to go into a couple of them, actually. So one of them is we're slowly seeing a lot of women entrepreneurs coming into the space now. We're not there yet, I would argue, but venture capital has always been a male-dominated industry, as you know. What are different ways that we can kind of get more women involved in venture capital? Or are you seeing a shift in more women getting into venture capital? What has your take been on that?
Yep. there's kind of two parts of that, and not sure which part you're referring to. Happy to talk about both. One is women in investing roles and decision-making roles specifically, and the
Yeah.
other are women entrepreneurs. So in terms of women in investing roles, I think we have made progress here. 5, 7 years ago, probably was a single-digit percent of women in partner roles, as in leading investments, making decisions. Now it's something more like 15%. It's in the teens, and there's a community called Allraise, which is targeted at women and non-binary founders and investors. And even they have shifted their strategy because there has been an increase in the number of women at the top. Now it's about keeping them there. On the entrepreneurship side, indeed, PitchBook has great data on the percent of companies funded that are female-only founders versus mixed gender versus all male. And yes, women is still a small percent of the pie. To me, it's about getting more representation across the spectrum, from who is doing the research to who is starting the companies to who is funding the companies and who is making decisions as well at the downstream customers, if there's hospitals or payors. Overall, I think we are making progress, but again, the bigger issue is that we are in a downturn in VC where funding is just really limited. The capital availability to supply ratio is not great. PitchBook also publishes that as well, and that's a bit of the reality that we're all living through.
Yeah, another point you brought up was the LP questionability, I guess, now since 2021. What kind of made that shift happen? And what do you think is it going to look like? Is this going to continue for 2026 and on? Or are we still going to be in the constant like when are the returns coming? Or like when is it going to start like popping?
Yeah, to understand that, we have to kind of track back and take a big step back as well, look big picture. So in 2020, 2021, it was during COVID, interest rates were really low. And so that meant that LPs that put money in different places, they'll put some money into real estate, some into public markets. VC looked really attractive because it's high risk, high return. So they started putting money into VC. Now, 5 years later, we haven't had as many returns, which means companies have not they haven't the IPO market has was quite frozen for a while. It's thawing now. We saw a number of IPOs last year, although there's still a lot of backed up unicorns and companies that want to go public. So it's starting to open up, but it's there's still a backlog. And with the overall economy, we also weren't seeing a lot of acquisitions. So what that means is if venture funds are not getting their money back, they can't return their money to LPs, then to put into new funds. So that cycle can be a challenge. And otherwise, LPs might look at other sectors and say, actually, maybe I should invest it into treasury bonds or into other spaces and not into venture capital. There was also a time point during which in public markets were not doing very well, and so all of their holdings there look depressed. But in VC, it's the valuations, it's their private holdings, so it's up to each fund to then mark their investments up or down. It's based on transactions, but sometimes there hasn't been a transaction. So then they were holding companies at a certain value, and so then almost it looked overweighted, as if LPs had too much money into VC and not enough into the public markets. So that was called the denominator effect. That is maybe getting a little bit better because some of the VC valuations have corrected. But overall, there's a lot of these macro challenges to why LPs are not necessarily all flocking to VC the way that they were 4 to 5 years ago. Is
Yeah.
it changing? I like to think so. We are out in the market fundraising and we are getting some traction, which is great. But I do know that in general, it's been a tough fundraising environment for everyone. Even though some of the larger funds, and it's been more winner take all as well, where some of the mega funds are taking even more share of LP fundraising, and that might be a reflection of LPs and their risk taking appetite in this environment. What it does mean, I would say, as a silver lining, is that it's a really great time to invest. Because 4 or 5 years ago, when the VC space was booming, that also meant that there was a lot of capital and it was a founder's market where companies got funded that may not have been in other times, and valuations were really high and rounds happened really fast. And I would say AI is in that bubble, but for the rest of the world, there's been a correction there, and that means more investor-friendly terms, more thorough diligence and rounds. It also means going back to fundamentals. The bar has, kind of gotten higher now in what a company needs to demonstrate to get investment.
Right. So You mentioned you guys are fundraising now. What have been the constant LP rejections that you've gotten, and what have been the biggest like LP approvals that you guys gotten for new guys coming into the fund right now?
So some of this is probably not what I would publicly share, but
Yeah.
what I can say is that our where we resonate, for funds, it's just like for for product, but products need to find product market fit. Companies need to find not just that, but company investor fit. Are they telling the story and enticing investors? Do they have a segment that where it resonates? Same with funds, actually. Funds are fundraising, and it's about finding the fund LP fit. And so you quickly learn, where that fit is and where it isn't. There are some more institutional investors that are looking for very long track records. They might be looking for, funds that have been around for several vintages. So, on fund number 7, been around for 15, 20 years. There are others that don't want to take regulatory risk. So we do invest across all healthcare segments, including digital health, devices, therapeutics, etc. Some funds prefer more generalist approaches rather than especially we're definitely a specialist in women's health, and the list goes on. So just like for companies that are fundraising, you have to look for the funds that match your scope and your round and your check size. Same with us. We have to find the LPs where our fund size is in scope and our focus area is of interest. And, all the different factors that make up our strategy are interesting as well. So it's a bit of it's there's a numbers game at some point of trying to figure out, who is the right fit for you.
Okay. And when versus like when you started fundraising at the very first for the first fund to now, how has the shift been when you guys are kind of investing straight into only women's health startups? How has the LP kind of reaction been at the beginning versus now? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. And so to clarify on our strategy, we are investing in women's health companies, and that previously was defined as companies affecting women's issues exclusively, so maternal health or fertility. We have actually expanded the definition as the industry has expanded. So we are now looking at things that affect women differently, such as heart health, and disproportionately, such as gut health. And when you include those, it's actually most of healthcare, right? Almost everything will affect women differently, disproportionately, or has some kind of gender element. So we've really grown a lot in that way. That said, we are still very tied to our mission, which is to improve the health of women. And so if you are a company falling in those later buckets, it's important that you are including women in your clinical trials, looking at data differently by sex, that you have diverse leadership teams. We do not mandate a female founder, but we do have majority female and people of color as founders. But we do ask those questions around gender diversity. So that has grown. How has the LP base or the LP story changed? I would say that as with most funds, Fund 1 is often comprised of more individuals and institutional investors. And as you go from Fund 1 to 2 to 3, you have a track record, you've made investments, hopefully had some exits, then you're able to attract the more institutional capital. And so we're seeing the same trend as well.
Cool. So kind of going back now, I'm a founder and I'm kind of coming to foreground for investment. What does the sourcing framework look like? I submit an approval. Hopefully I get an interview. Like how does it look like if I'm a founder? What does the guidelines look like? What do you guys look at
Yep.
before
Yeah. So we take deal flow from all sources and directions. A lot, as you can imagine, there's a lot of inbound outreach, and that includes both cold inbound directly to our emails. I'm not sure how those are published, but probably not hard to guess. Also, we get inbound from bankers, inbound over LinkedIn. I call that cold inbound, and then there's what I call semi-warm. So we go to a lot of events. We're judging pitch competitions. We're showing up to places, speaking on panels, and these events are great to meet new entrepreneurs as well. I personally don't like to take new pitches at these events because it's very frenetic, it's chaotic. there's not enough time to really sit down and talk in depth. But I use that as a source to meet new folks for new deal flow, and I'll say follow up with a deck. Or if there's someone that we're already talking to but we haven't met in person, those are a great chance. That's a great chance to have that face to face meeting. So
Right.
they're semi warm, and then I would say what's more successful often, leading to next steps and, well, no, leading to investment, I would say perhaps would be, warm inbound and, well, I don't know, maybe it's not inbound, warm connection. So this could be from our LPs, could be from co-investors, which is probably the most frequent. It could be from existing companies in our portfolio that knows another founder. And then, of course, people that we already know within our network from our previous lives. In this case, often, the companies are already vetted in some way because they're being recommended by co-investors. So it can be a little faster to kind of move things along. That said, we do take every pitch very seriously. And I forgot to mention, we do have a pitch form on our website, foreground.vc. There's instructions on which email to use or information to include, and we review every single pitch. We may not get back, exactly right away, but those are all received, and we work through that as part of our pipeline. The last bucket I would say is outbound. We do develop theses in a space, and then we will actually, proactively reach out to companies in that space. And it's worth noting that oftentimes we are meeting companies when it's too early to invest. Maybe it's pre-seed, maybe it just spun out of academia, but it's great to just have that initial conversation. And part of
Right.
our process is that, no matter which route you come through, we will first screen a deck, take a look, does the thesis or does the company focus match our thesis? Is the stage right? And again, even if it's not the right stage, sometimes we'll take a call anyway just to get to know each other, because there are several companies that we've gotten to know, 1 or even 2 years before we made the investment.
So, okay, so team, product, price, and market. Rank those four to like what you guys think as high priority to like lower priority, I would say, when you're like kind of guiding a founder.
Yep. Actually, well, to walk you through how we think about it, first we start with the market. Like, is this a
Okay.
large, compelling market with significant needs, such that there is a need and you can achieve venture scale returns? Yes. Then we look at the product. Is this product compelling? And that can take different forms. For existing products that are on the market, as in it's been commercialized, we will look at traction to give a sense of, is this meeting product market fit? We will also mystery shop the product ourselves at
Yes.
times. Uh, for life science companies, they are not on the market, so there's nothing for us to look at and test, but they are in development. So to get a sense of potential for the product, we are looking at research. Does the underlying scientific foundation make sense? The early results that they do have, it won't be the pivotal clinical trial, but does the early results point us to, the vision of the future and likeliness to get there? So, market, product, and yes, team is very important. And for team, there's a number of things that we do look for, including both the underlying, skill set from their previous work that makes them the best person or the best team to solve this problem. A level of personal commitment is often helpful as well, because it's really, really hard to start a new company, and understanding, what motivates the founder is really helpful. And, a track record for execution. And that could be from the previous life as a founder elsewhere or in other roles. And also just from what we can tell in the diligence process, you can kind of get a sense of how people work, how they think, and how they're executing. So we covered market, product, team, and exit potential is, that's the most important, actually, in many ways, because at the end of the day, we are here to invest LP capital and make returns. And sometimes you can have the best market and the best product and the best team, but if the valuation is too high, or if we don't quite see the exit potential, that can be a challenge.
So how do you decide if a category is finally ready for venture scale disruption?
Yep. So to take, venture capital funding, that means that you need to be able to reach venture scale returns, which means multiplying the value multiple folds in a short period of time, 5 to 7 years. So that's not for everyone. I do an annual webinar with an accelerator group where one of the first things to talk about is that there are different forms of capital, including non-dilutive, debt, venture funding. Venture funding isn't for everyone. If you don't expect to have a hockey stick like, growth curve, if you don't want to give up control of your company and get replaced someday potentially, then you don't want that. And of course, there's always a bootstrapping option as well to take no funding if you can generate a sustainable business. All that to say, venture funding does come with expectations. And when we think about is a market ready, we are looking at a few factors, which is, some of it is around the market itself, like how large is this market? How critical are the unmet needs? Like, has the problem been solved? And from here on out, it's just incremental change. That's less exciting. Or is there vast white space where there's a huge number of patients, huge clinical unmet needs? For example, endometriosis. 10% of reproductive age women have this condition. It takes a very long time to diagnose. There are very few solutions, and it leads to a lot of issues for women, not just for pain or work absenteeism, but also fertility challenges. That's the right market. So that's market-based factors. And then there's looking at other tailwinds that are happening outside of the market, but can lead to innovations. So, for example, when COVID happened, health really grew and blossomed, and the reimbursement strategy was there. And so that's a great time to build in telehealth. Right now, we are in a wave around AI for care delivery, AI for drug discovery. So then, what are the waves of new technologies and tools and regulatory and other factors that can lead to innovation, and does that intersect with a specific market?
So how is your portfolio using AI today, so far?
Yeah, so a couple of the ways that we discussed before. So some of it is really, I would say it is supporting care delivery, but just not patient facing. So for tasks like scheduling, for analytics, driving new insights. Others are using it, for example, to discover new biomarkers that don't exist, or take a very large data set to then understand kind of correlations between, for example, vaginal microbiome testing and different types of symptoms. So I would say it's very infrastructure and insights driven, rather than clinical decision making at this point.
And for startups, I think, I've met with a lot of founders, and like one of the number one things that they mention is, for example, getting payors. And most startups want to kind of have an end goal of working with payors. That's where the cash cow is. What has been your kind of advice based on your portfolio or working with payors overall? Like, how has that kind of changed over time?
So most of our companies produce products, or they sell products that are reimbursed in some way. And often that is through a payer channel. And we are looking at others that might go through employers, for example, but we really don't spend the bulk of our time in the D2C cash pay world. And that's because we think that from an access standpoint, it is better to have lower out-of-pocket spend for consumers, and that in the long term, having payer reimbursement, provides this kind of sustainable path in the future. Payer reimbursement comes in different forms. It really depends on what product or service you're selling. So on the service side, for example, sometimes there are existing reimbursement codes called CPT codes that you can tap into. In that case, then you are looking to get in network with the payer. It's a blocking and tackling approach of kind of going payer to payer. Sometimes you can go national, which is great. Then you can get in network with with a national footprint, to get a network so that you can bill the payer for those codes. Other times you're providing services that do not have a CPT code, but very valuable for the payer. And you're negotiating specific per member per month, or per engaged member per month contracts. With payers, sometimes they might want to start with a pilot. Maybe it's paid, maybe unpaid before they scale that program. We have companies that do both. And in general, payers, they care about the solution being high quality, and they care a lot about what it's going to impact for them. So how is it going to improve healthcare for these patients, from a diagnostic and outcome standpoint? And also, what is their financial ROI? So, you've provided a service that will prevent NICU stays, for example. Maybe reduce C-sections, reduce NICU stays. what does that actually translate to from a payer saving standpoint? So I would say for companies, if you can deliver that, that is win-win. If you can sell your product, get patients better care, save payer money, that is the trifecta and what every company should strive for. And I would say moving forward, a lot of companies want to move towards value-based payments with payers, where instead of getting paid, for the care, the volume delivered, let's get paid based on those outcomes I can deliver. That's a holy grail if we can get there. The challenge is that attribution is hard to measure. If the payer has 3 different programs affecting that population going at the same time, it's hard to say, like, was it your program that led to the decrease in this or that, or was it some other one? And then to tie a dollar value can be challenging. But I would definitely say that that's the direction that companies all want to move towards. You have to get your foot in the door first, of course, do the work, collect the data, prove the outcomes, and then move towards value-based payments if you can.
Yeah. How has, in your experience, payers been adopting to AI overall?
Yeah, and not to speak on behalf of all payers because they all will vary in their appetite. In general, the way that I see the world is I sit in a very specific corner. Like I and my portfolio companies, we are in a very disruptive corner of the universe where we are visioning and thinking big picture about disruption and how we're going to change things and radically transform. The reality is the majority of healthcare is not delivered in that setting. It's exciting to sit here because this is about the future. But today, care is largely delivered by incumbent health systems paid for by payers through these very traditional ways. And when I think about the incumbents, there are some that are more open than others to adopting innovations at all, like partnering with our portfolio companies. And some of them actually do sell through providers. So that's kind of a different path. But in terms of adopting new innovations, it kind of varies. And when it comes to AI, I think everyone has agreed that there's great potential, but the reactions about how to adopt and the safeguards are a little bit different. So, some payers and some health systems, will have, or probably most, will have concerns around privacy. So, what is happening with data as they adopt AI tools, as well as with accuracy. So, we know that, a lot of these AI tools and chatbots can radically expand access to health information for consumers, but it's not perfect. There are definitely, errors and, there's hallucinations and whatnot. And it can be hard for the unsophisticated, regular consumer who's not a medical professional to parse through all of that. And the debate that I see is, well, even with the problems and the errors, is it better than existing care? Because humans make errors too, right? If you peel the onion back in a health system, it can be terrifying. Just what goes on there, that, we probably wouldn't accept the level of errors in the restaurant industry, or in airlines. But in healthcare, it's there, and a lot of it's not transparent. You don't know. So there's some great research about Waymos, for example, being a great public health solution because Waymos are actually safer than human drivers, even though we have a lot of concerns, right? If a Waymo does get into an accident, because any accident is bad. But with Waymos and accidents, you can actually measure that, and you can compare it to human drivers and accidents. Problem with healthcare is we actually don't know how many errors there are, both with humans and with AI. So that's a challenge. And the flip side of the argument is, well, in America, healthcare is really struggling. Hospitals are struggling and they're shutting down. And, um, you and I live in places where there's plenty of healthcare access. So still not perfect. Still, some groups are not getting that. At least we live in that proximity. Whereas in much of America, when a rural hospital shuts down, you have to drive a few hours to get basic care. And so for those populations, is it better than nothing? Is it better than, not having care? So I see a lot of debates here. And I will say, incumbents, of course, are going to be slower to adopt than the innovators. That's to be expected. But I think it's in a transformative time, and it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out and how it gets adopted.
For clinicians, number one thing is trust. And like going to your Waymo example, like if you see a 90% chance of not getting into an accident versus like a 90% chance of a medication not getting like mismanaged, it sounds worse for a medication going mismanaged. And I feel like that would break more trust versus like a Waymo 90%. Oh, it's like, I'll be fine. There's a 90% chance I'll be fine. Like, has that kind of played out like a big trust setting? More, a lot of providers not willing to accept a couple things because there's not, they they don't think there's going to be still like mistakes that can happen?
There is a company called Doctronics that has an autonomous AI writing prescriptions in Utah, and that's specific use cases. It's a refill where an NP would have done it. NPs do work that is already very algorithm driven. So it's not like the wild, wild west. But, as one example, you can see where this extrapolate where this might go to. Right now, I would say much of the use cases around AI and care delivery and healthcare like services is really around, it is more that back office. It is around insurance claims and, AI scribes. It's really more in that layer. And also, I would say in information gathering for doctors. So there's some staggeringly high percent. I think it's maybe like 60 or 70% of doctors that have used some sort of AI tool for information. So in the past, you would go to a website called Up to Date, look up some literature, and people probably still do that. But now you can really expedite that by using these tools that just aggregate much faster all of the medical information. So that's not decision making; that's for information. So that adoption is there. Yeah, AI for clinical decision making, that's kind of a whole new world. And that's what personally intrigues me because that's where I see a radical transformation. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Kind of going back to foreground here, what is like, I guess, the quote unquote North Star look like for the next 5 years? What is the direction you guys are trying to go to?
Yep. Yep. So Foreground's mission is to improve health of women through venture capital investments. So we love to see a few things. We love to see the space grow even more. There are a handful of dedicated funds right now, many of whom we co-invest with. We love to see more generalist funds get into the space. And already we are seeing interest, but we want to see even more capital flow into the space. And that's important because we invest seed to Series A, and we want to see those Series B, C, D investors. So one is growing the ecosystem. Secondly is we want to grow as a fund and continue to drive the space forward as a fund dedicated to the space. And we love to, just see more innovations as well. And we haven't done a ton upstream with universities and academia, but we are seeing, more and more academic groups, spend real time innovating women's health. So the whole value chain, is where we see the energy, and we love to just be at the forefront of that.
Yeah. And as a practicing clinician yourself, what are like clinical red flags that you've seen before, if you have any stories or like that you kind of keep an eye out for in pitch decks that you don't like to see?
Would say that, it's really important if providers are in your workflow, you're selling to them or getting referrals through them, or you need them to do something for your company, it's really important that there is a clear value proposition for the provider and they're incentivized. That doesn't mean money per se. It doesn't mean that they need, that they need to get what they're doing, but it could be for other reasons, but it has to make sense for the provider. And so sometimes I'll see a pitch deck where they want to sell to the doctor. The doctor should pay this company for information, but it's unclear why would the doctor need this? How would it actually change their work decision making? How would it help them? Does it get more patients? Does it improve patient experience? Or what is that value proposition? It is not always clearly laid out, even when the provider is in that flow, and so that can be a red flag if I kind of push and that hasn't been clearly sought out. And if your provider, if the provider is a critical part of your go-to-market, then also having provider feedback is really important to prove that the value proposition is there. And sometimes that hasn't been just thought through fully.
If you could invest in only like one quote unquote boring health problem in 2026 that most people are ignoring, what would that be? Like, and that could probably give mostly like 10x returns. Like, what would that be?
Yeah, so I kind of go back to, what do we care about? What do we think there's, opportunities? So we need large untapped markets, essentially. And in women's health, there are several of those. I would say probably, again, we live in this space, so every issue is interesting to us and not boring. But yeah, if we look broadly, women's health has overall been underserved. Areas like endometriosis and PCOS, they fit the bill for having large populations, large clinical unmet need, and yet not many solutions. And in women's health too, you can layer on stigma. So you use the word, boring. What might others say is boring? I would actually say sometimes some areas are seen as stigmatized, like, oh, it's lady parts. We don't want to think about that. That's just not something people are comfortable talking about. And I think that's actually changed a lot. But, some areas that I think can maybe fall into that would be like pelvic floor issues that affects also a high number of women, especially after childbirth, as well as in kind of midlife and later age. Large populations, not great solutions, chronic UTIs, like unsexy, right? But there's a lot of women who have recurrent UTIs that they just can't get rid of, and it ties to a lot of their other body parts. So these are areas that you may not see other investors talk a whole lot about, but would fall into our category of women's health, large unmet need, large populations, and interesting areas to innovate.
Right. And one of my previous guests, Amit Gar, co-founder of Tau Ventures,
Oh yeah, he's great. He's a friend of mine. A funny story, we actually met over a decade ago.
no
I was
way.
not in investing at that time, and we were both in the bridal party for a close
No.
friend's wedding. So, and so
Okay.
she basically had co-ed bridesmaids and bridesman.
I'm gonna text him that. But that's funny. No, because one of the things he mentioned, it was very stuck up to me, was that a lot of startups should be focusing a lot on health policy now. I mean, like it used to be a lot on the incubins and those large players, but getting into health policies like is such a huge thing. What's your take on startups knowing where that looks like overall?
Every startup should have a regulatory strategy because it'll affect them in some way. So if you are developing a life science product, understanding what's happening at the FDA and what regulations are changing is important. If you're getting paid by Medicare, Medicaid, then actually, even if you're not, because a lot of commercial plans will follow, Medicare reimbursement rates, then yeah, that's really important to follow. So in general, that has always been true. What's happening now is with the policy landscape is just unprecedented, and it's important to watch. That's kind of the elephant in the room, I suppose, for women's health and all of healthcare, that science is being undermined and, insurance coverage is being challenged. There's just a lot happening at the policy level. We like to think that administrations are, they run in 4-year increments, and we're here for the long term. So we are, keeping an eye on that future long-term growth, no matter what is happening now, and just kind of doing our best to keep an eye on things.
If I ask one of your portfolio companies, like the benefit of partnering with Foreground is, what do you think they're going to say? Like, what is like one word or one sentence they'll say that Foreground
Yep.
represents?
Yep. Yeah. And I would say that it would be sector expertise and hands-on support. So from a sector expertise standpoint, we've invested in dozens of companies in the women's health space. And so we know the space well. We can bring in other investors. We write really thorough memos that we do share. And the portfolio they learn from each other. Because, it's a lonely job to be a CEO. And often it's nice to have peers you can bounce ideas with. And on the hands-on support, we are sitting on boards as director or observer for the majority of our companies. And so, we're providing that board level guidance, and we roll up our sleeves. We founders, they text us, they brainstorm with us. We make endless introductions. We get folks on panels. We really will hustle in whatever way the company needs us to.
So Foreground would be like a start, would it be like a startup on venture capital?
Well, all VC funds should be providing portfolio support. That's kind of part of the
Yeah.
mandate as a VC fund. That's what gives you a right to an allocation, in the round, especially if it's competitive, is that you've promised portfolio support. So I would say all funds will do that to some extent. Well, actually, not all funds. Most funds, depending on their strategy, will take that seriously. There's different strategies. Some funds are more spray and pray. It's about a high volume of small checks. In that case, you can't provide such deep support, to every company. Ours is a more concentrated but still diversified approach where we have a diverse portfolio, but we have enough time to really dig deep with each company if they want it. Not all of them do. The other reality is that the later stage companies will tend to have less involvement with funds. It's really the earlier the stage, the more hands-on the approach can be. Yeah, I would say that it varies.
Do you see, like, you guys mostly would be co-investing or like leading rounds? Would you say? Would you guys?
So we do all of that. We lead, we co-lead, we also follow. It depends on the round construction and where we are as a fund, but we're very open to leading.
Now, you brought up a great point there, though, about like competing against other VCs. Like, why are we the chosen one, I guess I would say, is and have you seen yourselves ever competing against those large funds in I mean, in overall, and how has that been? Like, do you guys kind of say, "Okay, like, we'll come co-invest with them," or do you say, "Look, this is why you need us over them?" Like, what is your kind of
I would say it's a more of a co-investment approach. We always welcome seeing more capital in the space, and you know, rounds can also oversubscribe, so there can be room for everyone.
who is, like, one founder not on in your portfolio that you kind of admire and, like, respect the most?
Interesting.
Hard question, I
Um,
know.
yeah, I have to think about that a little bit.
That's what
Well, maybe just to list one, there's a woman called Daisy Robinson who is up to Stealthco. I don't know what it's called yet, but I really enjoyed getting to know her through her last company in the ovarian health space. Actually, that's another trend, in terms of the interesting areas. Ovarian health, not just around fertility purposes, but because the ovaries affect the rest of your healthcare and your body, as a side note. But yeah, I really enjoyed getting to know Daisy through her last venture. She has also worked with other groups to promote the ovarian health cause, such as the X Prize, and I know she's doing something new now, so I look forward to learning more about that. She's technically trained, has a PhD in this space, and it's always I always like the technical founders that are also able to jump on the business side.
So now rapid fire here. What does your free time look like outside of VC? I know it's an extremely stressful job, but what does that look
Yeah,
like?
well, I don't have a lot of free time because I have two children, 3 and 5, and they take up most of my free time between their play dates and dance class and art class and all of that, and just taking care of them in general. For whatever time I can carve out, it's kind of basic. I mean, I like to walk the dog, see friends, exercise classes. I actually do make a lot of, make everyone on the team at some point go with me to Barry's boot camp. That's kind of my thing. And that's probably one of my favorite ways to find balance.
I need to check that out then. Okay, is that in San Francisco?
It's all over the country and
Oh
international.
no way, I did not know that. Okay, so what has having kids taught you?
Well, it's a life-changing experience, as everybody says, but it's hard to really understand that until you live it. So I would, it's really, really rewarding, and it does give me a different lens through which I look at the world. I thinking about other people's children and how are we leaving this earth and what else is happening on this earth to other children and families. Definitely gives me a different lens. It also makes me more efficient because I don't have endless time. Before kids, I could push late into the night. I can do weekend work, but it's harder now, or it's a real sacrifice, or there's real trade-offs. So learning to be more efficient and do more with less time is another learning. And the third, I would say, is this is not from having kids per se, or it's not the kid part itself, but the process to get there is that I faced many fertility challenges, which meant that it took me longer, and I had to make other sacrifices, such as not traveling in a consulting job because I had to do IVF and what that means for my career. And I learned that, when you're young, you can make choices fully based on what you want and what's best for you and your career. But when you get into certain life stages, that's not the only thing you have to solve for, right? It's also about life circumstances and having the flexibility to do what you need to do for your family. And I would say, as I get older, I'm turning 40 now, and I've seen many friends with health conditions, with parents that have health conditions and other issues, and then you just realize that time is not all your own to make decisions on. You have other things that you're responsible for, and that changes the calculus on how you spend your time.
In 5 years, people will say Alice was right about blank.
I liked for them to say, right about the opportunity in women's health, driving returns.
Who do you look up to on a daily basis? I guess that kind of goes into who do you respect the most, but is there someone or something that you look up to?
A lot of folks. A big fan of Michelle Obama. Yeah, I've read several of her books. I think she's this is incredible.
Well, Alice, it's amazing to have you on the show, and I enjoyed this so much. It was a pure joy to have you, and thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.